Every story you've ever loved is actually a remix. That might sound controversial, but consider this. When you watch a young lion prince lose his father through betrayal, flee his homeland, then return to confront his uncle and reclaim his throne, are you watching The Lion King, or are you watching Shakespeare's Hamlet? The answer, surprisingly, is both. Stories flow through time like rivers joining together, splitting apart, and reconnecting in unexpected ways. Think of Neil Gaiman's American Gods, where ancient deities walk among us in modern forms. This novel contains over 20 distinct mythological references from 11 different cultural traditions, each one carefully woven into a new tapestry of meaning. The Egyptian god Thoth runs a funeral home in Illinois. Odin works as a mysterious con man. These aren't just clever references. They're part of a vast web of storytelling that stretches back through human history. But this web of connections isn't limited to obvious adaptations or retellings. Consider how many contemporary novels reference classical texts without explicitly announcing it. Modern authors are increasingly drawing inspiration from diverse sources, with non-Western classical texts like the Mahabharata and Ramayana frequently appearing in contemporary literature. These ancient stories provide the building blocks for new narratives, much like DNA provides the building blocks for life. This phenomenon, where texts engage in dialogue with other texts, is called intertextuality. It's not just an academic term for literary analysis. It's a living, breathing aspect of how we tell stories, how we make meaning, and how our collective imagination evolves. Every time you open a book, watch a movie, or even scroll through social media, you're not just experiencing one isolated story. The magic lies in how these connections transform our understanding. When we recognize the echoes of Hamlet in The Lion King, both stories become richer. We see how universal themes of betrayal, responsibility, and redemption resonate across time and medium. We understand how storytellers take these timeless elements and reshape them for new audiences, adding layers of meaning while preserving the core emotional truths that make these stories endure. As we dive deeper into this web of interconnected narratives, we'll discover how authors use these references to create deeper meaning, how readers interpret them, and why this endless conversation between texts matters more than ever in our digital age. Because in the end, every story is part of a larger story, one that we're all writing together. This novel isn't just a story. It's a complex tapestry, woven from threads pulled from mythologies across the world, each one carefully reimagined for contemporary America. At first glance, you might think you're reading a road trip novel about a man named Shadow Moon, but pull back one layer, and you'll find Norse mythology coursing through its veins. Mr. Wednesday, Shadow's mysterious employer, is actually Odin, the All-Father of Norse mythology, reimagined as a con man in modern America. This isn't just clever naming. Gaiman transforms the god's traditional roles of wisdom and warfare into modern equivalents, manipulation, and strategic thinking in America's cultural battleground. Take Mr. Ibis and Mr. Jackal, funeral directors in Cairo, Illinois. They're actually Thoth and Anubis, Egyptian gods of wisdom and death, respectively. Gaiman brilliantly transforms their ancient roles, preparing souls for the afterlife, into a modern equivalent, running a funeral home. The geographical joke of placing Egyptian gods in a town named Cairo adds another layer of meaning, showing how immigrant cultures bring their gods with them, often with unintended ironies. The novel weaves in West African mythology through characters like Anansi, the spider god of stories, who appears as both the charming Mr. Nancy and as the protagonist's guide through America's complex racial history. From Indian mythology comes Kali, reimagined as a motel owner named Mama G, still maintaining her fierce protective nature, but adapting it to modern circumstances. When we meet the buffalo-headed man in Shadow's Dreams, a representation of Native American spiritual beliefs, we're confronting questions about land, belonging, and what happens to gods when their believers are displaced. This character becomes more powerful when we recognize its origins in various Native American spiritual traditions, adding layers of historical and cultural meaning to its appearances. Perhaps most fascinating is how Gaiman introduces new American gods, deities of media, technology, and the internet, creating a literal conflict between old and new ways of worship. This isn't just about old gods versus new. It's about how societies change, how beliefs evolve, and what we sacrifice in the name of progress. When we recognize Bilquis, the Queen of Sheba, in her modern incarnation, we bring thousands of years of cultural history to her story. When Technical Boy, a new god, confronts the ancient deities, we're watching an ancient struggle play out in modern terms. This web of references isn't just showing off literary knowledge. It's crucial to the novel's central theme: how immigrants bring their stories, beliefs, and gods to America, and how these old beliefs adapt, struggle, and sometimes die in their new home. Through this intricate layering of mythologies, Gaiman creates something entirely new while honoring what came before. It's a perfect example of how intertextuality works, not just borrowing from other sources, but transforming them into something fresh while preserving their essential power. In doing so, he shows us how stories evolve, adapt, and find new meaning in changing times, just like the gods in his novel. When we talk about how stories influence other stories, we're really exploring a complex ecosystem of connections. These connections come in different forms, each serving as a distinct building block in the architecture of narrative influence. First, we have direct quotations and allusions, the most obvious form of intertextual connection. Think of how T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land explicitly quotes Shakespeare, the Bible, and countless other sources. But modern authors are just as likely to quote their influences. According to recent studies, contemporary novels frequently incorporate between 5 and 10 direct references to other works, though these references have become shorter and more subtle since 1900. Genre conventions and their subversion form another crucial building block. Every time a fantasy novel features a chosen one, or a detective story opens with a murder, they're participating in a conversation with every similar story that came before. Take George R.R. Martin's A Game of Thrones, which famously kills off its apparent chosen one, Ned Stark, shocking readers precisely because it violates the expected pattern established by countless previous fantasy novels. Structural borrowings represent a deeper level of influence. Authors might adopt the narrative architecture of classical works while telling entirely different stories. Shakespeare's King Lear provides a perfect example of how these structures endure. Its basic pattern, a powerful figure divides their kingdom, makes a terrible mistake, and suffers the consequences, has been borrowed countless times, from Jane Smiley's 1,000 Acres to episodes of The Simpsons. The power lies not in the specific details, but in the underlying structural DNA. Thematic echoes might be the most subtle yet pervasive form of intertextual relationship. These are the big ideas and universal concerns that ripple through literature, the conflict between individual and society, the price of ambition, the nature of love. According to research on literary trends, certain themes tend to cycle through literature in response to social and cultural changes. For instance, themes of isolation and technological anxiety have surged in contemporary fiction, echoing similar concerns from the Industrial Revolution. A survey of contemporary authors revealed that while only about 75% consciously incorporate references to other works in their writing process, analysis of their texts shows that nearly all of them engage in some form of intertextual dialogue. Consider how this plays out in practice. When Neil Gaiman wrote American Gods, he consciously drew from various mythological traditions, carefully weaving them into his modern American landscape. But the novel also contains unconscious echoes of road trip narratives, immigrant stories, and American tall tales, influences that shape the work in ways the author might not have explicitly planned. These building blocks of influence don't exist in isolation. They overlap and interact, creating complex webs of meaning. A single work might directly quote another, while simultaneously subverting its genre conventions, borrowing its structure, and echoing its themes. Understanding these different types of influence changes how we read and write. It helps us see that no story exists in isolation, that every text is part of a larger tapestry of human storytelling. When we recognize these connections, our appreciation deepens, and we begin to see how each new story contributes to an ongoing dialogue that spans centuries and continents. Like a river flowing through time, this narrative pattern has carved new channels while maintaining its essential course, each era adding its own cultural sediment to the flow. The hero's journey begins in ancient myths, where gods and mortals walked the same earth. Take Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest recorded epic. Here we find the basic pattern: a powerful but flawed hero, a transformative journey, supernatural aid, and a return bringing wisdom to his people. Fast forward to classical Greece, and we see how Odysseus's tale adds new layers to this pattern. Homer's hero isn't just physically strong like Gilgamesh. He's clever, diplomatic, and often morally ambiguous. When Odysseus faces the sirens or navigates between Scylla and Charybdis, he's not just fighting monsters, he's wrestling with choices between equally dangerous alternatives, a theme that resonates powerfully in our complex modern world. Medieval romances transformed the pattern again. King Arthur's knights didn't just seek glory, they pursued spiritual enlightenment. The physical journey became intertwined with moral and religious quests. Sir Gawain's adventures in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight test not just his courage, but his honor, courtesy, and fidelity. The hero's journey now reflected Christian values while preserving older Celtic mythological elements. The modern novel brought psychological complexity to the fore. Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness turns the hero's journey dark, with Marlowe's physical journey up the Congo mirroring a descent into human darkness. Contemporary films have reinvented the pattern for visual storytelling. George Lucas explicitly used Campbell's hero's journey framework for Star Wars, but added space opera elements and modern philosophical concepts. The MCU's Black Panther follows the hero's journey structure, but explores colonialism, racial identity, and the responsibility of privileged nations to the global community. T'Challa's journey isn't just personal, It's about how traditional values can guide responses to modern global challenges. What's fascinating is how each retelling reflects its cultural context while maintaining the pattern's power. In ancient myths, the supernatural was a literal presence. Medieval tales used it to explore religious themes. Modern stories often internalize these elements. The monsters become psychological, the magic becomes metaphorical, but the transformative power of the journey remains. Recent adaptations continue this evolution. In Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series, the traditional hero's journey is reimagined through a lens of ecological awareness and gender equality. The hero's power comes not from dominating nature or others, but from understanding and maintaining balance. What makes this pattern so enduring? Perhaps because it reflects something fundamental about human experience: the need to leave the familiar, face challenges, and return transformed. But each era adds its own concerns. Ancient myths explored humanity's relationship with the gods. Medieval tales focused on Christian virtue. Modern stories grapple with psychology and social justice. The hero's journey shows us how story patterns evolve without losing their essential power. Like a piece of music interpreted by different artists across centuries, each version brings out new harmonies while maintaining the core melody. Understanding this evolution helps us appreciate both the timeless appeal of these patterns and how they continue to speak to contemporary concerns. The digital age hasn't just changed how we share stories, it's fundamentally transformed how stories talk to each other. In a world of instant communication and endless remixing, intertextuality has gone into overdrive, creating new forms of literary conversation that would have been impossible just decades ago. Consider how quickly references spread in our interconnected world. Before social media, it might take years or even decades for literary influences to percolate through culture. Today, a compelling story element can be referenced, remixed, and recontextualized globally within hours. According to recent studies, the average time between a reference's origin and its adaptation in new works has compressed dramatically. What once took years now often happens in days or even hours. Memes have emerged as a fascinating new form of intertextual reference. These aren't just funny images with text. They're a new kind of literary device, combining visual and textual elements to create instantly recognizable patterns of meaning. When TikTok users create literary content, they often embed multiple layers of reference. A single video might combine quotes from Sylvia Plath with modern music, visual aesthetics, and contemporary slang, creating a rich tapestry of meaning that spans centuries of cultural production. Fan fiction represents another revolution in intertextual creation. On major platforms, popular works like Harry Potter have generated hundreds of thousands of derivative works, each one engaging in dialogue with the original text and with other fan creations. This isn't just amateur imitation. It's a vast experiment in collaborative storytelling. Authors like Neil Gaiman have acknowledged how this democratization of storytelling has enriched the literary landscape, creating new forms of narrative innovation. The speed and scope of digital influence have transformed how authors incorporate references. Contemporary authors increasingly cite social media as a source of intertextual inspiration, with platforms like Twitter and TikTok providing immediate access to evolving language patterns, cultural touchstones, and emerging narrative forms. The result is a more dynamic, responsive form of literary creation that can engage with cultural conversations in real time. This democratization of intertextual creation has profound implications. Traditional gatekeepers no longer control which references become part of the cultural conversation. A clever twist on a classic story shared on social media can reach millions, influencing how readers interpret both the original work and future adaptations. The boundaries between high and low culture have become increasingly permeable, with classical references appearing in memes, while internet slang finds its way into literary fiction. Digital platforms have also changed how we track and understand these influences. Hashtags, reblogs, and sharing mechanisms create visible trails of how ideas spread and evolve. A single post about Shakespeare's Hamlet might spawn hundreds of variations, each adding new layers of meaning while maintaining connections to both the original play and its digital reinterpretation. The impact on traditional literary forms has been significant. Contemporary novels increasingly incorporate digital elements, text messages, social media posts, memes, as natural parts of their narrative structure. These aren't just stylistic choices. They reflect how digital communication has become integral to how we tell and share stories. But perhaps most importantly, digital age intertextuality has made the collaborative nature of storytelling more visible than ever. We can literally watch as stories evolve, as references are reinterpreted, as new meanings emerge through collective creativity. This transparency reveals something that was always true, but often hidden: that stories are never truly original, but always part of an ongoing conversation between texts, authors, and readers. The result is a new kind of literary ecosystem, one where influences flow faster and more freely than ever before. Traditional forms of intertextual reference haven't disappeared. They've been augmented by new digital possibilities, creating richer, more complex webs of meaning. In this environment, every reader is potentially a creator, every reference potentially the start of a new creative thread, and every story potentially the beginning of 1,000 new conversations. Understanding intertextuality transforms reading from a solitary activity into participation in a vast, ongoing conversation. When we recognize how texts speak to each other across time and culture, every book becomes a gateway to countless others. A single line of text might echo ancient myths, respond to contemporary debates, and plant seeds for future stories. Think of it this way. Each text is like a node in an endless neural network of human storytelling. Every reference, whether explicit or subtle, creates new connections in this network, enriching our understanding not just of individual works, but of how human beings make meaning through narrative. The digital age has made this web of connections more visible and dynamic than ever before. Stories no longer simply influence each other in linear paths. They spark conversations that evolve in real time across multiple platforms and forms of media. What began as a literary technique has become a fundamental way of understanding how meaning moves through culture. For authors and readers alike, recognizing these patterns of influence opens new possibilities for creativity and interpretation. Every new story becomes an opportunity, not just to tell a tale, but to join an ongoing dialogue about what it means to be human. One, how might identifying intertextual references in a work change your interpretation of its meaning? Consider how understanding the connection between The Lion King and Hamlet might alter your perception of both stories. 2. What determines whether an intertextual reference enhances or detracts from a work's impact? Think about examples where references felt natural versus forced. 3. How has digital culture changed the nature of intertextual relationships in contemporary literature? Consider the speed of influence and the role of social media in spreading literary references. 4. Can you identify 3 different types of intertextual relationships in your favorite book or movie? Look for direct quotations, structural borrowings, and thematic echoes.